So hi James, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to me today.
Glad to.
Great. So there tends to be some sort of ambiguity with defining cloud computing.
Sure.
So let's start with that. Can you give me a definition that you go by for cloud computing?
Sure. So what we do is we focus on the enterprise buyer, IT buyer, and we wanted to put in place a definition that would help them differentiate cloud computing from all the other things that call themselves cloud, and there's a ton of them that are out there. So our definition is that this is a infrastructure that's highly scalable but highly abstracted away that allows you to host your application and pay for it by the drink or by the consumption level. So very different than traditional hosting where you have a reservation, you're paying a persistent bill. This is a bill that comes and goes as you come and go.
So in your presentation that you did today, you talk about it as a disruptive technology. So can you elaborate on that? How is it disruptive and what are the changes it's bringing about?
Well, it's disruptive following the definition from Clayton Christensen, who's a Harvard professor, and I have to give him a lot of credit in his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, for identifying this trend or this change that takes place in markets. And what disruptive technology is it's a use of technology or a use of a product or a market or business model that's well known and well established, but is completely reapplied to a market that is completely separate. So what happens in this circumstance with cloud computing is it takes the hosting of infrastructure or being an IT shop or having your data center, and it takes the business model and moves it down to startups and small businesses who don't need a quality service, don't need SLAs, don't need a lot of the things that enterprise wants. They don't need the security auditing and the processing and all that. And it applies it down to them. But it also puts it at a price point that is acceptable for that market. So startups and small businesses, $50, $100, $500, it can be a lot of money. And they can't even come close to some of the data center costs that most enterprises have, which is could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And so they can take advantage of cloud computing for as little as $50. Put it on your credit card and you're in business.
Wow, wow. Well, why is this change happening?
This change is happening because of virtualization primarily. Because you can now virtualize servers and you can put lots of workloads on the same physical box, you now have the ability to pack more customers onto a smaller space. The other thing that's unique about virtualization isn't just the slicing and dicing of a server, it's being able to dynamically move those workloads across different servers. So if you have an application that takes 20% of a server today, it gets really busy, you don't want to just knock the other guys off. So you can actually move them to another server and let that one expand. That's a big difference we haven't had before, and that allows a hosting company or somebody who has a large scale out infrastructure like Amazon to be able to just put thousands of customers in there, pack them in, move them around, shift them, and highly utilize the resources they have, more so than they ever could before.
Good, good, good. Well, since the primary market, as you mentioned in your presentation, IT is kind of reluctant to get into this space. Who's using it primarily?
Well, what we see is majority of the users are startup companies, people who are really building a new business model right on the internet. That's the bulk of who is using it. We're also seeing some small businesses that are trying to build an online presence use this as well, and this is appealing to them too because, again, very small budgets, but they don't tend to have a lot of IT infrastructure already, and so they're kind of over that same position, the daunting task of getting into a data center or getting into hosting when they're not there before. They can do this very quickly and easily. What's another interesting market here is the enterprises themselves, but it's not traditional IT that's getting into this. It's the business units who want to quickly have a presence on Facebook or who want to put a very unique interactive promotion out on the web. And so they can do this quickly and easily without a business plan, without a business model, and something they can put on their T&E budget. And a lot of what's happening also is they're being brought into clouds by their interactive agencies. So Disney's a really good example. They have some services and some promotions that run on Amazon EC2. Disney didn't put it there. Disney's interactive agency did.
Interesting. So what would you say are the implications to IT departments with enterprise experimenting in this cloud space?
Well, there's a scariness of what's going on here because they're being circumvented. And this is part of an overall sort of philosophical shift that's happening with IT. IT forever has sort of been where you put all your IT products and what you did technologically. And they really defined themselves by that, and that was really important to them. As a result, they kind of became gatekeepers. If we do security a certain way, we make sure everything's protected a certain way, so you've got to use us. You don't have a choice. But with that came a lot of process and burden and time. And so what happened is new application deployment that businesses wanted to have take place were taking weeks and weeks and sometimes months and months to happen. So if you really need to get into the market because your competitor's there with the same kind of offering, and your IT department says it'll be 6 months, not acceptable.
Right.
And so this tension point is really what has caused the opportunity and why business units are actually independently acting, because they have to get into the market quickly, and IT is just too slow.
Right.
So why should I even tell IT about this? I know they can't compete. I'm just going to go around it.
Right. Well, you had a brilliant example of this with the New York Times in your presentation. Do you mind just kind of giving us that story again, because it was a great example.
Yeah, and this is actually documented in the New York Times blog by the person who did it.
Okay.
And basically, he was given a task by the business unit of saying, we've got all these old archived newspapers forever. Can we make them easily searchable on the internet, article at a time instead of newspaper at a time? For him to do that, that means he had to take the PDFs of all the newspapers and blow them apart.
And there were how many? 11 million, you
11
said?
million articles. Yeah, and so he had to blow all these PDFs apart into separate individual articles so that you could put them all up there, which is a pretty big task. And he would have needed, as in his estimate, hundreds of servers to do it.
Right.
Well, IT is not going to give him 100 servers.
Right.
And he didn't have a business case. This was like, could we do this? That was as far as it went. And so he found a cloud where he could put this. It would happen to be Amazon EC2. And he went up there and he was able, with his credit card, to provision all the servers, put all the storage up there, which turned out to be 4 terabytes. And in one day, because he could get access to all these resources, he was able to convert all the files.
Fantastic.
And that's just a huge example. And this is the kind of euphoric feeling that these developers get when they can do that. It's like, oh my God, for just this small investment, I was able to do a huge value to my customer.
And you said he said that it was highly addictive as well, getting that kind of instant satisfaction.
Absolutely. And he immediately had all these ideas pop in his head. I could do all these other things in the cloud too. And he spreads the word on his blog.
Great.
So other people that are peers of his and other companies, see what he did and like, oh, I could do that too. And that's really how it's all spread.
Wow. So how should enterprise IT start embracing cloud computing then?
Well, they need to acknowledge that there's a likelihood that their business units will start using the cloud. And so you don't want to put a wall immediately. What you want to do is you want to embrace this because you want to learn from it.
Right.
And so you really want to say, if you're using clouds, let's figure out which clouds fit our model best and can protect the data, because you are going to put customer data out there at some point, and we don't want the company to be at risk. So they need to go talk to the cloud vendors right now, understand what they can do for them, how their processes work, and what fits with the environment. Then they can come back to the business units and not shut them down, but say, we endorse the following 2 or 3 clouds. These are the ones you should use if you want to use them, and you don't have to tell us. We'd like you to tell us because we'd like to learn how you're using it and why you're using it, because partly IT also does want to provide a percentage of those services. So a lot of IT shops are saying, can I build my own cloud internal to my own infrastructure, whether it's a hosted infrastructure or within my own data center. And the IT infrastructures that are used by the cloud vendors to put their cloud in place can be bought by enterprises, and they can do the same. Long term, what we think is going to happen is that there will be the internal cloud supplemented by the external cloud, where you put an application in the cloud, because it's small, it doesn't require a lot of resources, but if it gets popular, you know you're going to want to grow that, and you shouldn't have to buy more servers to grow it just because you started with an internal cloud. You should be able to flex from your cloud to theirs and back.
So in the overall scheme of things then, where is cloud computing heading?
Well, cloud computing is a very, very small part of the overall hosted model today, and we anticipate it will stay a small percentage for quite some time, because it's got to mature, and in that maturing process, it's going to be somewhat painful. There's going to be differentiated business models. There's going to be a lot of hype. There's going to be a lot of companies that are going to get into this and really not do it well. And so as we go through all of those rough patches and so forth, the market will slowly grow and build. What we suspect will happen is, say 10, 15 years from now, we suspect that because virtualization creates such a compelling business model that it'll become a huge part of the overall hosting market. And a lot of this has to do with the big companies that are getting into this. So Google and Amazon are already in this market. We know Microsoft is going to get into this market eventually, and some of the other really, really large web properties could get here. And that just makes it really easy to endorse, because if you want a service that's going to be able to scale, gee, Amazon scales pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was very enlightening, so thank you for taking the time to tell me a little more about this.
Glad to help.
Great.